All right, welcome back everyone to lucky number 13 of the Beginner to Master Speedrun. Coming into today, rated 944. I'm currently on a 44 game win streak. Can switch to my profile here. I do have a new profile picture, and we are approaching interesting territory. I'll hopefully be able to keep the win streak going. One interesting thing I've noticed is I have not played a single opponent rated above 1,000 elo, so maybe that will change today. But let's waste no more time and let's hop into the first game. Okay, playing Milo 202, more numbers, etc. Okay, we have e4, play e5. And not sure how many games I'll play this episode, but okay, I'm getting very used to this opening. I'll play knight c6, defending the pawn in e5. I've encountered this a decent amount over the course of the series. This has to be at least like the 5th or 6th game. Opponent obviously wants to checkmate me, so I will play g6. I think I've explained this position many times. Really, you just want to defend against the opponent's threats. In this case, white still wants to checkmate me, so I'll obstruct the queen and develop the knight. And pawn c3. So I'm pretty sure I have this position. Maybe I had something similar. Pawn c3, it's a useful move, preventing knight to d4. And now it's a question how I want to proceed with development. Like usually in king's pawn openings, the bishop likes to go to c5. But with pawn c3, if I play bishop c5, like white might expand with b4 and b5. And because I've already committed to g6, I think I'm just happier playing bishop g7. And yeah, just getting ready to castle, hopefully having a solid kingside. And the plan going forward from here is to complete development with this bishop, very possibly get the bishop to g4, maybe try and exploit the queen. Knight h3 is interesting. Knight h3 does put the knight on the rim, but it does have the idea of playing knight g5 and targeting the f-pawn. I'll just castle here. With castling, I ensure that there's not going to be any issues with f7. Okay, we see pawn d3. So maybe white's preparing bishop g5. But only one of the minor pieces for white can access g5 at a time. So I mean, if I really want to like stop white from developing further, I could play h6. But I think that's a little bit slow. I mean, I think it's a question between h6 or d6. If I play d6, I do allow bishop g5. But it's not the worst thing ever. Like maybe then I can play h6, kick the bishop, and then try and trade a little bit. I'll play pawn d6. Also, my opponent is rated just below 1,000, so I guess if they beat me this game, they'll get their rating goal. If they lose to me, then their rating will be refunded, as is the case with all my opponents in this series. So knight g5. I mean, honestly, when I saw queen h5 on move 2, I thought this was going to be like a pretty easy game, but yeah, white hasn't made any like serious blunders. With knight g5, that signals that maybe white's going for knight takes f7. And I'm going to provoke white to move the knight. And if we see knight takes f7, then generally that's like a very good trade for black. I'll get 2 minor pieces for rook and pawn. But then going into the middle game, the minor pieces will be much more useful than rook and pawn. So opponent realizes that knight takes f7 was not preferable. Knight h3 was probably the best move there. Now white's essentially wasted a couple tempi moving the knight back and forth. And now I can probably continue. Now I don't want to take the knight because the knight's just a very bad piece for white. I think I'm happy to play bishop to g4 developing with attack on the queen. But the question is what to do next. F3 might be coming. I should note here that, like, imagine white plays F3 and I retreat, then G6 is actually a weak point in my position because my F pawn is pinned. There is potential for queen takes G6 later if I'm not careful. So I have to be a little bit awake here to avoid blundering. Knight A5 comes to mind, but do I want to play Knight A5? Does attack the bishop. And D5 also comes to mind, but then D5 would make the knight overworked. It's already defending the bishop. So, yeah, what to do? Could play Queen D7 and F3, and then maybe I can take or move back. I think Queen D7 is pretty solid. And it connects the rooks too, which is a sign that I'm basically done with my opening. And okay, the queen's a little bit more useful. Okay, we see knight G1, so white moving a lot with the knight. And now, I mean, one of the benefits with queen D7 is I over-defended the bishop, so my knight's no longer tied down. I can play the move knight H5 to attack the queen. Then the queen has E3, so I'm not quite trapping the queen. Yeah, maybe I don't want to move this knight so soon. And D5 is another consideration, but after takes, then the queen is overworked, and then takes, and takes. So what to do? I want to punish white. I think maybe now is the time for knight A5. I'm trying to remove one of white's only developed pieces. Okay, so white counterattacks my bishop. It's actually not a bad move. So I take here, white takes here, and then the H file opens. I don't really want to go into that. So bishop E6, I guess. Struggling to get like a very clear advantage. I mean, one of the goals is to try and open the center, given white has most of the things undeveloped. I think it's very likely we'll trade off the bishops. After takes, I don't want to take with pawn because queen takes G6. I can take with queen. Have to manage my time here. Ooh, okay, white going full aggressive mode. But I think this is the first like very big mistake for white. Because once I take the bishop, and assuming the pawn recaptures, I'll take on E4. And the queen will be attacked, the pawn will still be attacked. Now we see white's position beginning to crumble. I think it's kind of an important lesson that we see from this game is sometimes it's not easy to immediately punish the opponent for making mistakes or violating opening principles. Like sometimes the best approach is just to be solid, be patient, follow principles yourself, keep the pressure. Here I save the knight, attack the rook. Rook H3, I'll very happily play pawn F4, unleashing the attack. Yeah, super solid position. I've not lost a single pawn. We see rook H2. And ideally, I just want to open the position and get to white's king. I mean, E4 comes to mind. E4 takes... I can't take back with pawn because the knight hangs. Kind of like the idea of starting with this move. Reinforcing the king's side, also creating the battery. So attacking the c-pawn. And yeah, I'll have to start playing much more quickly here. Already below 4 minutes. It's always a trade-off with these games. Like I'm trying to explain every move I make, try and provide some lessons, but sometimes that comes with using a bit more time than I normally would. So here white can defend with some moves, or not defend. Knight e2 attacks the knight, but I'm going to take and counterattack the queen, also skewering the queen and the knight. Now we see some nice geometry. White will be losing some material here. And assuming the queen retreats somewhere, I think I'll take on e2 with my knight. And then hit the bishop on c1. Yeah, it's a nice kind of chain of defense. Queen defends a bishop, defends a knight. Guaranteed to take if I want to. But I can also take here. Yeah, I think there's more reason to take here. I know, like, usually when you're up material, a good strategy is to trade and simplify, but another strategy is to attack. In this case, the knight is a much better attacker than this bishop is at doing anything. I have a nice pawn chain, outpost on g3. If I want to be fancy, I could play bishop f1. But yeah, let's be civilized. Bishop e6, attacking the rook. The opponent maybe trying to play against my clock time. Up a lot of material now. 11 points of material, according to chess.com. If the opponent doesn't resign, I think e4 is very likely to come next. To unleash the bishop, also to try and open the e-file, get a rook involved. Do I want to trade queens? Might as well. Sometimes when you're attacking, you want to keep queens on the board to more efficiently checkmate. But in this case, yeah, it simplifies, and I'm still going to have a lot of pieces to checkmate with. Maybe white's trying to sacrifice everything and hope for stalemate. Which at this level, like, it's usually a reason to not resign, like, ever. Because there's always the off chance an opponent will get overconfident. But yeah, stalemate was not happening. So, okay, nice game overall. I mean, opponent went for the 4-move checkmate. I didn't get checkmated. I followed opening principles, developed, got my king safe. White lost a lot of time going for this attack, which didn't really work. Ended up retreating. And I mean, it did take time to actually win material. H3, I think, was a good move. And in this moment, I think this was the biggest mistake. White could have taken, and I mean, this is still playable where White can still try and develop and have a reasonable position. But I would have been looking to play d5 and open the center and just keep the pressure on. So let's move on. That was the first game. So 45 games streak. Let's see how long I can keep it going for. Playing AP Red Fox. Let's play e4. We have the Sicilian. I think I'll play a similar opening to what I played in episode 12, where my opponent also played knight c6. And rather than going for open Sicilian, the move I sometimes like to play here is pawn c3. It's called the delayed Alapin. And the idea is to simply play d4, take over the center. The two main moves for black are to attack the pawn, either with knight f6 or d5. But a lot of players at this level don't play those moves and usually allow white to take over the center. So we'll see how my opponent reacts. Pawn d6, I'm very happy to get the two pawns in the center. Yeah, usually the point of the Sicilian is to trade a c-pawn for a d-pawn. But in this case, I've converted my c-pawn into a d-pawn, so I keep my two center pawns, and now I control a bit more space. And this is one of the goals with a lot of openings in chess, is just to control the center squares with the pawns, and then have very fluid development with the knights and bishops. I think depending what black does, that will determine how I complete development. And it's very likely that I want to castle as quickly as possible. But we see d5. Okay, so have to react to this move. There's a few options here. I could take, I could push, or I could develop and defend. And honestly, like, all of the options look very reasonable. There's definitely an argument to go for like any of these. But I think the move I like the best is taking. Because once the queen takes back, then I can develop with attack. And I can keep attacking. I'm going to play this move d5, which gains more space, hits the knight. If knight moves, there might be some bishop b5 coming. Knight doesn't have a great square. If knight b4, I have queen a4 check to win the knight. Otherwise, like, these squares are a bit ugly. These squares were off limits because my knight on f3. So life is pretty good. I mean, we're 8 moves in. Black has not developed a single thing. Like, every single black thing is on its starting square. But it's still a question, like, how to maximize my advantage from this position. If I play bishop b5, then like black will block with bishop d7 or knight d7. Probably bishop d7 and offer the trade. And it's not easy to attack anything like directly or like even generate any tactics because black has everything on its starting square. So I think I'll start with bishop b5, which does directly attack the king. And if bishop d7, I think I'll just castle here, leave the tension between the bishops. If takes, I don't mind my knight coming in. Then maybe there's potential for bishop f4 and knight c7. Yeah, actually bishop f4 looks nice. Just completing development, leaving the tension between the bishops. Black trying to relieve the tension. So now I have to choose, like, do I trade? Do I retreat? Do I retreat the other way? I'm dreaming of some, like, rook e1 and then knight d6 checkmate. That would be a funny smother mate. Can't quite achieve it so easily from this position. I mean, the general rule here is when you have more space, you should avoid trading minor pieces. So I'm just going to move back. It does allow b5, but then I'll move back and keeping all the minor pieces on the board for now. And usually the reason why, like, white should avoid trades in this position is because black is a little bit more cramped. Like, the bishop is taking away the square for the knight. We might see bishop g4, probably one of the better moves. But then, like, if black takes, then I can activate the queen, and yeah, life is still very, very good. So queen c8, attacking the bishop. I'm debating between queen e2 or bishop b3. I think both of these moves are fine. I'm going to play bishop b3. One plan is, now that the queen is on this open file, it's the only file on the board with no pawns on it, I have a very simple plan of rook c1. And now that my bishop is no longer in the way of the c file, a rook c1 would already threaten some knight b5 ideas to discover the attack and then fork on c7. So let's play rook c1. Setting up, I think this is setting up like the first tactical threat of the game. Not so easy for black to stop. Like, the knight can't come to c6. The best move might be queen d8, which is kind of a sad move. And if queen d8, then I'll have to try and figure out how to keep making progress. Because it is hard to access c7 if I don't have the discovered attack. Well, I might end up doing, like, if queen d8, I could just play rook e1 and keep optimizing, like, the whole position. It's one of the few pieces not doing anything is this rook on f1. It is pretty rare that have a game where I'm up on time after the opening. Usually I take more time explaining things, but Yeah, black's in a difficult spot here. And queen c5 is another attempt, which does stop knight b5, but it would allow some other discoveries. And there's also bishop g7. I'm wondering maybe black can play this, I play knight b5, and then take the rook and take the knight. Give away the queen, but get some material for it. And it's spots like this which definitely difficult to play, but like not all hope is totally lost for black. Opponent taking a very long time. I might cut out the long think in editing. I feel like I've explained most things going on in this position. But in general, it's good to think on your opponent's time. Like a lot of players maybe have the habit of playing a move and then just turning off their brain or letting their mind wander. But if you can try and anticipate what the opponent might do or try and identify the ideas or just like key features of the position, it's a useful way of just thinking on your opponent's time. I'm imagining rook e1 and pawn d6. Okay, well, opponent resigns. So maybe a slightly anticlimactic finish. But yeah, it was a very feel-good opening. I mean, I think we see the venom of this early c3 move followed by d4. Black played what a lot of players would do, kind of trying to play naturally, but d5 I think was a clear mistake in the opening because it moved the same pawn twice. Even though black was trying to fight for the center, it just gave me time to attack things and gain space and develop. And then life was very good. So, rated 962. Let's keep moving on. Okay, playing Big Trump fan. This is my first opponent rated above 1,000. So maybe the biggest challenge incoming? Are we going to see another another Scholar's Mate? No. We see a Vienna. Vienna is an acceptable opening. I'm a little bit disappointed we're not seeing a Trumpowski. A Vienna Gambit. I know Levy used to cover this opening a lot. I think there's a lot of content creators that like to make videos about this or recommend this. Against f4, it's actually a difficult move to deal with if you haven't studied it before. Because if I take, then like already e5 or knight f3, and white can very often grab the center early on. So the best move here is pawn to d5, which creates a bit of chaos in the center. But I am counterattacking the pawn on e4, so after it takes, it's a fair trade. And because white moved the f-pawn, there are some cases where queen h4 check can be considered. In this case, queen h4 just runs into g3. And queen f3, I think, is a move that Levy liked to recommend. Maybe he has a course on it. And a few years ago, I played a match against him where I was preparing this opening in depth. And there's two moves here. There's knight c6 or f5. And having studied both of the moves, I prefer f5. Even though it looks risky, I do open this diagonal. Queen h5, I just have g6. And if en passant, then I can simply recapture with knight, and then have easy development, castle quickly. Meanwhile, I do reinforce the knight on e4. And yeah, usually the best move is to play d3 to kick my knight. I'm going to take on c3. And coming up, there's a very important move. We're still following opening theory. But for anyone that maybe plays this line as black, it's important to not just like memorize the moves, but also understand the moves. So in this position, if it's white to move, white would play d4 and have like a really, really good structure, really good game going into the middle game. So in order to stop d4, I can play d4 myself. And what this does is it in some cases creates a situation where the pawn will have less defenders. Just because pawn d4 is no longer possible for white, and I'm ready to play knight c3. Uh-oh. I just lose my camera? What just happened? Oh no. Let's see if this works. I'm going to take the pawn. There we go. Okay. That's never happened before. Anyway, we have a position after 8 moves of the opening where for both sides we only have one developed thing, and that's our queens. But with queen takes d4, I'm hitting the rook and the e-pawn. Oh no. I'm going to have to troubleshoot my camera. I don't know what's happening. Let's try this again. In the meantime, let's keep making moves. This is actually a very, very good position now. White's counterattacked, but with g6, I counterattack, and now the queen, the pawn, and the rook are all attacked in white's position. And after my opponent played the first 7 moves like perfectly at like grandmaster level, we see some issues with my camera. Oh no, my camera battery. All right, let's take a rook. Actually, I should explain this because it looks like I could take the pawn with check and then take the rook. But if I take the pawn with check first, then white can play queen e2, pinning my queen to the king, and then I won't be able to legally take the rook. So it's better to take it right away. I'm hoping the camera will survive for the rest of this game. Also hoping my opponent will not survive for much longer. Now, yeah, I do have to be careful of my queen aligned with white's queen. Like if somehow bishop c1 to b5 check was possible, then that would win my queen. But yeah, it's a dark square bishop. My king's on the light square, so not too much concern of tactics. Also no concern about the queen getting trapped because yeah, it has a lot of room. And I could start with queen c3. I could take the a pawn. I could play bishop to b4. I like bishop b4. Very simply developing with attack. I think I've said this phrase a few times this episode. It's also known as developing with tempo. I just bring out a piece, gain time attacking the opponent. And like generally, these types of moves you don't need to think about too much. Like it just improves, and then opponent has to figure out how to defend. With bishop d2, then that will give me the option of trading everything, or maybe even winning the pawn on d4. If king f2, then white loses castling rights. So position is looking good here. And there's also king e2. I think king e2 and king f2, I could probably respond in a similar manner. I mean, again, I could take the pawn, but I'm more interested in getting my pieces developed. I like the idea of just playing knight c6. Another developing with attack type move. Now attacking the pawn on d4. It's also attacked by the queen. Now, what white should probably do here is play bishop b5, develop and pin, preventing me from taking on d4. But then I can develop, break the pin, and then again threaten to take on d4. So yeah, trying to be efficient with the developing moves. With pawn d5, this does attack the knight and save the d-pawn, but it does kind of abandon the e-pawn. I could deliver the check first, but I think I'm happy to take on e5. And I'd rather have the king stay on f2 because there's potential for knight g4, or maybe next bishop to c5. White could pin, like white could play queen e2, But my knight's already defended. With queen e2, I'd probably respond with bishop c5 check. So it's looking good here. I'm trying to imagine like ways I could go wrong, and there is one way to go wrong here. Like if I play the seemingly innocuous king f8, that would be a terrible blunder because bishop h6 check, and that would just blunder my queen. So I definitely don't want to allow this bishop to check my king. So I think c6 is a very fine move. Even though it might offer to open the d file, white can't really make use of it. If I want to here, I could throw in some of these checks. But I think taking back still looks very fine. Knight defends the pawn, attacks the bishop. The bishop doesn't have too many great squares. Knight also restricts the bishop. It does feel weird though that like both kings have a lot of like empty space around them, like two unsheltered kings. But I think it's going to be white's king who is more exploitable. And now it's a question between knight g4 or bishop c5. And I could calculate, but I think I'll rely a little bit more on intuition here. I like knight g4 because it allows the queen to come back into the center, and then I leave the bishop controlling e1. And there is a line here, if king f1, then I have bishop to a6. Like this is almost checkmate. Like, the king would have no legal moves, white would have to block. Now the one thing with this move is I leave the pawn on c6 undefended, so I just have to make sure that I'm keeping the attack against the king. White has what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 legal moves if we include queen takes g4. Okay, we see the king land on e2. And now I could play queen e5 check or bishop a6 check, I think are the two main moves to consider. Let's play bishop a6 check. There's been a lot of moves this game, developing with attack. So another example. Okay, king to f3. It's like very close to checkmating. I have queen c3. Now the king can't retreat. It's probably going to have to move forward. And there's also queen d3. And bishop e3 would get mated in one. So at this point, I'm looking for the forced checkmate. Seems close. Also realizing there's a possibility for a castle checkmate. Still casting potential. But I should try and finish things off efficiently. I could play g5 here. Play queen e5, king f3. Queen e4, king g3. Bishop e1. That looks good enough. Oh, there's also king g5, which would be kind of funny. King g5, it's black to move and checkmate in one. If you want to try and find it, feel free to pause the video. I think there's only one checkmate in one here. And let's go ahead and play it. Bishop e7 checkmate. So that was a 20-move game. We saw actually a pretty high-level opening. I think that's the first time I encountered the Vienna Gambit in the Speedrun series. And my opponent knew like the first several moves, like through d3. And then once I played d4, I think this was the first big mistake, is taking the pawn. I'm pretty sure white is supposed to play knight e2 here. Is it knight e2? Engine saying queen g3. Queen g3, preparing knight f3. And it actually gets complicated because, yeah, white basically sacrifices the pawn on c3. and then can play this move bishop e2. And then there's some ideas of bishop h5 check, or putting the bishop on f3 and then later knight e2. So yeah, usually like at a higher level, if you play the Vienna Gambit, you have to know past the first few moves of the opening, like past d4, especially if black plays a critical line. Of course, at this level, it won't happen so often that black will know theory, but hopefully some lessons to take away. And yes, this is useful for anyone who plays e4, e5 as black. Like if you encounter the Vienna, it's good to know this move pawn d5, and then even further, this move pawn f5 usually offers a nice game. So currently rated 972, on my way to getting to 1000 elo. I think I'm going to wrap it up here, try and resolve whatever camera issues I was having. Thankfully, it's alive now, but I might have to like switch out the battery. So do stay tuned for the next episode, where hopefully I'll break 1000 elo. I'll see you guys soon.